Well, good afternoon once again, KGOU listeners, and it is another edition of the KGOU Readers Club. I'm managing editor Logan Layden. Thanks for joining us today. The book we're featuring is Tinkertown, a Wheatfield, an Airbase, and Us. And I've got the author with me for the next hour, and that is Dr. Jim Willis. This is all about the history of Midwest City and Tinker Air Force Base, the relationship between those two institutions. Jim, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, it's good to be here, Logan. I appreciate your invitation.
Well, let's talk about the book itself and how it came together here at the beginning of the program and learn a little bit more about you. Obviously, you grew up, or at least a large portion of your early life was spent in Midwest City, Oklahoma. Now, I've come to learn that every single town in Oklahoma, no matter the size, small or huge, has an interesting history of its own. But I will have to admit, when I think of Midwest City, I think of it as a suburb of Oklahoma City. And the Air Force Base is nearby. But as we read Tinkertown, we see this sort of more fascinating history reveal itself that you've brought to us. You've wanted to write this book for a while. You've gotten around to it finally. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what inspired you to want to do this, and where you've been in the decades of your life leading up to it.
We don't have enough time for that. But yeah, well, I appreciate it. It was actually my wife Ann's suggestion that I write this. I've been telling her stories over the years about growing up there and escapades and misadventures and what have you. And she said, you really need to put this stuff down. I've spent my career writing other kinds of books as an academic and then also a historian. And I was looking for something to do in my early retirement years here, and I finally decided it was time to take Ann up on her suggestion and write the story of where I came from. This idea that was in my head, and which still is there, and it's still awaiting a definitive answer. How much of who I am is where I'm from, has been kind of the guiding light for the book. I did grow up in Midwest City. My folks moved there when we were in 1949. I was 3 years old. The city was about 7 years old, 6 officially, since its incorporation in 1943. I was 3, it was 7, and I just felt like it was kind of like my big brother, really, and that we learned from each other and go on from there. So I graduated in '64 from Midwest City High School, went on to OU, graduated there in 1968, kind of commuted back and forth for part of that time to Midwest City. So I was connected basically from 1949 to 1968 with the city and see it go through a lot of different changes in that time.
Yeah, and you came from originally Ohio, right? When you were
Right. I grew up in, I didn't grow up there, but I spent my first 3 years in Columbus, Ohio.
What was it that brought your family to this new town, this new community of Midwest City?
Right. Yeah, WKY television, actually. My dad joined it in its very first year of operation in 1949, and real pioneering station. And my dad was a pioneering TV guy, and so we came on out with him just after the dust had settled, literally and figuratively, from Oklahoma, from the Dust Bowl days, and a little bit of a hard sell for Mom. She was from Pennsylvania, used to the finer things in life, and here she goes traipsing out to a place which in its earliest years was known more as Midwest City than Midwest City, because all of the roads weren't paved, and when it rained, there was a lot of mud.
And that brings us sort of to the origins of Midwest City, which is interesting because, so many of the communities in Oklahoma, big or small, they started, before the land run or around the time of statehood. And Midwest City is different it didn't start until the 40s. And
Right.
there was like this big plan in place
Yes.
for
Yes.
for the town. Can you talk a little bit about the origins of it? I know it's Bill
Mhm.
Atkinson, right, who was
Yes. He was the founding
instrumental is
genius.
a not a good enough
Hmm.
word when it comes to his history as it relates to the town. But we're talking about a town that didn't even start until the 40s. If you would just
Right.
talk to us about that, how it came to be.
Yeah. Well, a lot was going on there, as you remember. That was the build up to uh, and the eve of World War II, and uh, the military realized that it was really lagging behind Germany uh, in aircraft production and in usable um, combat aircraft. So the Defense Department, the War Department at the time, decided to build uh, an aircraft factory and an aircraft maintenance facility out in the Midwest somewhere, anywhere I think between Fort Worth and Kansas City, something like that. So they wound up siting it at Midwest City. Well, it wasn't Midwest City; it was a Wheatfield, 10 miles southeast of Oklahoma City. Uh, and so when they did that, Bill Atkinson, who was a young real estate developer, actually a former journalist himself from Texas, he was working in Oklahoma City doing some developing. Every realtor in the state was trying to figure out where this was going to be built. He found out, interesting story in and of itself on how that happened. And he decided to go across the street on 29th Street and buy up the first 160 acres. Then he bought another 160 acres, and that's 320 acres became the original mile of Midwest City. You could stand on the south side of 29th, throw a rock, the north side of 29th, throw a rock over to the south side and hit the Air Force Base, which was just nothing but dust at the time. But it was soon to become the largest aircraft maintenance facility in the country. They also built planes there during World War II. And Midwest City started from zero um, went to 60,000 people within a period of about 2.5 decades, something like that. So, yeah, it was quite a story there. The town wouldn't have been there probably without the base, uh, and the base wouldn't have been there as long as it is probably without Midwest City. So it was a real partnership between the two.
And that was there was a lot of consternation there, right? From what people were trying to figure out, where exactly is this base going to be built? Because
Right.
obviously, if there's going to be a base in this area, wherever it is,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to need a community around that. There are going to be people living and working there. And there was a real rush to figure out exactly where it was going to be. And it was E.K. Gaylord, right, who the publisher of the Oklahoman, and he and Atkinson were friends, but eventually that soured
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
over this whole situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Atkinson was the mover and shaker in Oklahoma City. Uh, he was the go-to guy, the decision maker on most things. Um, Chief executive, really, in a way, of Oklahoma City. So he he was given a list of the requirements, the site requirements, and he wound up publishing that list in his paper in the Oklahoman. And Atkinson really said all I had to do was to read that list, and I knew where it was going to be. It was a little more complicated than that, but that put him and sent him in the right direction. So he gets in his car one day and he drives out southeast of Oklahoma City, going along the requirements list that were on the site requirements list. Knew it was going to be about 9 or 10 miles outside of Oklahoma City. The southeast was the likely place for it. A lot of land, a lot of flat land, close to oil, close to water, close to the rails, and looks in his rearview mirror, figures he's about 9 or 10 miles out, gets out of his car, goes over to the south side of 29th Street and starts talking to some farmers over there, asking if they're interested in selling their land. No one was. Uh, And then he goes over to the other side of 29th Street, south side, talks to farmers. Everybody's willing to sell. So he figures he's in the right spot. So his granddaughter, Cindy Mikeman, tells the story that he went up to one more house over on the south side, and a lady answered, and he introduced himself. And he said, "Do you mind if I ask you one question?" He said, "I know you may feel uncomfortable about asking it, or answering it rather, but has anyone spoken to you about holding on to your land for a while?" Uh, and he said, "Even if you can't answer it," he said, "could you wink your eye uh, if I'm on the right track here?" And she winked her eye, and he went across the street and bought his first 160 acres on the basis of that, and started building almost immediately. After he consulted with the Pentagon, told him what he had done, bought the land, and that he wanted to build a town that would fully service the needs of the people of Tinkerfield, because he knew there were going to be a lot of them, and there were going to be young families, and there were going to be a lot of kids. And so he built Midwest City to be a full service family town using the urban plan of a fellow named Seward Mott from Oklahoma City, from Washington, D.C., who the Pentagon put him in touch with. And that was basically a plan that had been used a similar plan had been used to build Washington, D.C. So Midwest City was kind of built on that same plan, with curvilinear streets moving out from 29th Street, and a lot of room for homes and everything else that needed to be put there.
And it was a plan. Like this wasn't, as so many other cities and towns in Oklahoma have been, sort of grow organically over the course of time. This was here are the streets, here's what direction they're going to go. Like, this was outlined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a complete entity, beginning with a shopping center. It used to be the Atkinson Plaza Shopping Center, then the Lockheed Shopping Center right along 29th Street across from Tinker, and then fanning out from there up to the City Hall Circle, and then these curvilinear streets would go out from there. My home was actually within that original mile, only about 3 blocks north of 29th Street on East Lockheed Drive. And it was a compact community. Houses started going up almost immediately. And it was really a miracle. The shopping center was finished in about a year and a half or so. Parks, a lot of parks for the kids, a lot of thinking about the schools, and everything built for a family,
Huh.
including a movie theater, which was called the SkyTrain. And it was called the SkyTrain because during World War II, one of the two main aircrafts that Tinker built was the C-47 SkyTrain, which became the workhorse of World War II for transport. And over 5,000 of them were built there, and over half of the workforce that built them were women from Midwest City. So it was everything was kind of in sync with the idea of the town and the Air Force Base. All the streets were named for aircraft or aircraft companies or aircraft generals. Even the schools were named for Midwest City High School were the bombers, and were named essentially for the B-52 bombers. So it was a very coordinated, well-planned, well-executed city.
Yes, indeed, which we're going to talk
Mm-hmm.
more about here shortly. And you've got your Bombers T-shirt on right now.
Oh yeah,
I
I figured.
see.
My
Very
wife said,
good.
that'll do a lot of good for radio. And I said, yeah, well, whatever.
Well,
I'll
that's
get
why
in
I
the
thought
mood.
I'd describe it. A quick break for us here. The book is Tinkertown. The author is Jim Willis. He's with me for the rest of the hour. I'm KGOU Managing Editor Logan Layden. This is the KGOU Readers Club. More coming up in just a couple of minutes here on KGOU. program. We're back with the KGOU Readers Club. I'm managing editor Logan Layden, and the book that we're featuring is Tinkertown, Wheatfield, an Airbase, and Us. It's the story of Midwest City and Tinker Air Force Base. Is told from the perspective of Jim Willis, the author of Tinkertown, who spent his formative years in Midwest City, Oklahoma, and is shining a light on the interesting history of the community and the airbase there. We were talking a little bit during the break about the influence that hometowns have on people, and that is a prominent theme in your book here, and got me to thinking as well. From where I'm from, down in southeast Oklahoma, in McAllister, which also has the Army ammunition plant nearby, and a couple of different elementary schools. You talk about even wondering whether you would have gone into journalism or into writing if it weren't for some of the experiences that you had in Midwest City. And I wanted the same thing too. If I had been on a different part of town in McAllister and gone to a different elementary school than the one I did, how that would have shaped my life in the future. And so there, I do see in the book a little bit of this conversation about how people are influenced by their hometowns. If you want to talk a little bit about how you feel like Midwest City influenced you, stopping by the public library every day, maybe you wouldn't have had the opportunity to if you were in a different part of town, and maybe that shaped your life.
It did. It did. And to tell you the truth, I hadn't given that a whole lot of thought before I started writing this book. And it was one of my early answers to the question of how much of who I am is where I'm from. Again, it was part of Atkinson's design to build a family community. And one of the first things that got built was a library, a public library. And it just so happened that he situated that library halfway between Westside Elementary, which is where I went to school, elementary school, and my home on Lockheed Drive. And it was only a block to the library and then another block and a half to school. So I got to where I started stopping off at the library after school on the way home and got enthralled with reading books like Black Beauty and Treasure Island and what have you, and just that was my escape and my adventure. And then, as often happens, as you know, an interest in reading leads to an interest in writing. So I started writing my own stories and doing a lot of creating there. And I was often running. So let me read you just a short bit from the book here that speaks to this from another voice. One Midwest City native, Barbara Manning Cox, told me a story in 2024 that depicts how a single element from the past can still represent something alluring. She said that although she never worked at Tinker, she did go to school there in the hutments that the Air Force built for Midwest City kids while our school was being built. Growing up, she said, I lived on Turnbull, practically across the street from Tinker. My one memory is hearing the planes rev up, a tremendous roar heard for miles. I loved that sound as a child. It sounded all-consuming, like there was an exciting life happening out there somewhere. So it was with many of us, and so it was with me. It fueled my wanderlust, excuse me, just as the trains in Columbus that ran by our apartment complex did when my sister and I would go out and sit and wave at the conductors and wonder where people were going and coming from. And so that was another influence, for better or for worse. I've lived a life of wanderlust, and I've lived in a lot of places, and it's been a lot of fun. And I think that's a good thing for a writer to do, to move around and to look at the world through different lenses and gain new experiences. So, yeah, Midwest City had a big influence on that.
Yeah, and you talk about that in the book about in your very early life, the trains in Ohio and how that was replaced with the plane noises, and you thought that was a pretty good trade-off.
Trade-off.
Yeah, yeah.
It was. It really was. And those planes came in pretty low. I mean, there was one subdivision that I write about, the Glenwood subdivision, that had to totally be vacated after over 800 homes were built because it was just too dangerous for the families. And there were a couple really, really serious crashes. And cost lives. And so I have a friend who told me that she used to play out in the backyard of her friend who lived over in Glenwood. And the planes were so low that they would, in the summer, they would be out back playing, and they would fill up water balloons, and they would throw them and try to hit the wings on the plane when they came in, and sometimes succeeded in doing so.
They
So,
were coming in that low. That's amazing. So yeah,
yeah,
those sounds of the planes revving up, taking off, landing, that was all part of.
that was all part of
Well,
it.
like you
Yeah.
say, they were uh, as much part of the sounds of nature as the
Hmm.
crickets or
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
wind or anything else.
Yeah, yeah, they
Was
were. It's just people would come and visit, and they would, they would be disturbed and distracted by all the noise, but it just became part of life for us.
well, as much as Tinkertown is a history of Midwest City, Tinker Air Force Base, it's also very much about you. It's a memoir,
Mm.
right? And I do want to do some service to that this hour. And I want to talk about your family. I want to talk about your mom
Yeah.
and the big influence that she had on Midwest
Mm.
City as it was this young, growing, fast growing community back in the 1940s and 50s. And your house basically served as this daycare for the community. But talk about
Mhm.
your mom a little bit, and
Yeah.
let's note she was around until just a few years ago.
She
20, she
was
lived to be 103. Is
103. Dad made it to 97. She was 103.
good
They
genes.
they redefined old age for me.
Yeah, but she had a huge influence, and your family did in early
Yeah, she
early
did. She
Midwest City. If you could talk about that. Yeah.
right. Yeah, both my folks did in different ways. And um, mom was she hit the ground running once she realized that this was going to be her new home out in Oklahoma. She didn't stand around and grouse about being dragged out to the Dust Bowl. And so one of her ideas, which became to fruition very quickly, was to start up a fully curriculum-driven preschool for the 3, 4, and 5-year-old kids in Midwest City. And there were a ton of them. As a matter of fact, uh, 1/3 of the population of Midwest City in the early years was under the age of 10.
And
So that's
Atkinson
how
knew that going into it,
Atkinson
that
knew that
this was going to
going
be,
into it.
you've got to serve the kids here.
Right. He
Yeah.
just didn't build houses. He built a community designed to, he was targeting a particular kind of demographic of a family and hit it, right on the spot. So it was a mom was a real entrepreneur. I'm trying to shut my phone off here.
Of course.
Okay. Mom was a real entrepreneur, and so she began uh, what she called Jack and Jill Preschool. Wanted to make it egalitarian for both boys and girls, and uh, so we cited it. She cited it in our home, and our home was basically one of the original homes in Midwest City, uh, and it was only about 900 square feet or so. Dad and my uncle had built on a den on the back side that added another 300 square feet, but that 300 square feet then became Jack and Jill Preschool, and the backyard was its campus, which was a good deal for my sister and me because it was loaded with playground equipment and stuff. And so we'd take our dog Laddie out there when school wasn't in session and have a good time. So she ran 2 sessions a day, 4 hours a session, morning and afternoon, 30, 40 kids in each session, 70, 80 kids a day coming through our house. She ran a pickup and delivery service in an old Woody station wagon that we had. And I mean, it was served lunches the whole 9 yards, graduation ceremonies for the kids, just like high school ceremonies with robes and gowns, musical productions held over at the elementary school auditorium a couple times a year. I mean, it was a big deal, and it helped to kind of unify the community, both civilian and military, because several of her kids were children of military parents, and she even had I think the son or the daughter, I can't remember which, of General Center, who was one of the earliest of the commanders over at Tinker Field. So it was great. She ran it for about maybe 7 years, I guess, and Uh, Thought it was time to spend time with the family after that. So it was fun though.
Yeah. So,
Hmm.
she was an influential woman in
Hmm.
Midwest City's history, but you also, I do want to talk about I mean, it's a given that Tinker
Hmm.
Air Force Base and Midwest City sort of go hand in hand.
Hmm.
Without the base, I'm sure by
Hmm.
now there would be
It would
stuff
have been
out
a
there.
suburb of some kind.
Yeah, but that was the
Yeah.
sort of impetus for it, and the relationship between the community and the base itself. As you talk about your childhood, I mean, you paint it's a fairly idealistic picture.
Hmm.
It seemed like a nice upbringing, and there was a
Right.
lot of patriotism around. It would be impossible, right, to separate the city from the base.
It was.
Tell
It
me a little bit
was.
about growing up, how closely they were
Mm.
tied together.
Yeah, there was a closeness, I would say, in mission, especially. My friend, General Brady, Roger Brady, who was kind enough to do the forward for the book and who was our quarterback when I was in school. We graduated together in '64. He went on to become a four-star general in the Air Force. We had a really good class of achievers there. Anyway, he said that he believed that one of the reasons it worked so well, uh, Midwest City and Tinker, was because Tinker was on a mission and Midwest City believed in that mission too. We had just come out of World War II. We had won. We knew that the military had won it for us, and so we saluted that. We honored that. We wanted to do what we could to support this facility, this big facility that was put there. And then there was also the practical aspect. There were about 26,000 jobs over there as well. That is 26,000 jobs. It's still hard to believe. Uh, when at a time, literally when there was no work at all in Oklahoma after the Dust Bowl. Uh, and we also benefited because of the financial aid, the federal financial aid, impact aid that the government gave Midwest City. They felt like, well, we build this base here, it's going to create a strain on the town, so we need to give them some money, and they did. For every military kid that went to school, we got extra bucks, and a huge part of our budget was being funded by the federal government. So it was a patriotic town. Yeah, it was. I write in the book about one of my earliest memories is uh, just seeing on a regular basis men who were missing a limb, either an arm or a leg or whatever, and they lost it in the war, and it wasn't really holding them back that I could see. We had a guy deliver our laundry every two times a week, maybe, and as he was counting his change, he would hang the clothes on his wooden arm, on his left wooden arm, and fish the change out with his right hand. And he had lost it somewhere, storming a beach or whatever. So there was a lot of patriotism there. We had a lot of parades, and Tinkerfield opened up, did an open house once a year. I think they still do that. And there was a lot of effort made. We didn't know specifically the things that were going on over there, but except for the people who were over there working, building aircrafts and maintaining aircrafts. Uh, but you couldn't get in and meander around if you didn't have a reason to be there. But we were united in spirit. Yeah, we sure were.
And we talked about your mom and her service
Hmm.
toward military families, but
Hmm.
women were important too as far as the airbase was concerned. And you talk a little bit. These are your sort of Rosie the Riveter
They were.
types.
Yeah. For the longest time, actually, I thought that concept came out of Midwest City and Tinkerfield, but it was actually in existence, I think, in World War I believe. But yeah, yeah, I write a lot about that in the book, actually. So many women, were over there, and they weren't all doing secretarial and clerical stuff. They were half the women who were building the C-47s were half of the force, rather, workforce were women, and tremendous, you know, tremendous sacrifice on their part. They were also raising kids. And so the base and the town would set up these entertainment possibilities for them on their schedule. So there were these bowling leagues that started up at 3 o'clock in the morning and went to 6 a.m., because the women were getting off work and they weren't ready to go home and jump right into bed. So it was, there was a lot of synchronization going on in town.
Well, you had a
Mhm.
normal childhood, or relatively normal, but we're lucky to have you with us here today. There's a couple of stories I want to get to. One before we take our last break here, but getting into trouble, um, including trying to build your own helicopter, which I think, fortunately, or
Yeah.
else we may not be sitting here today having this discussion. It never got off the ground.
Well, yeah, we didn't have a problem thinking it was going to get off the ground. The realization hit us though just before we took off that we didn't know how to get it back down once it got off. Um, so sort of tunnel vision there on that, I guess. Yeah, my friend Marky across the street and me, we would get into a lot of stuff, and that was one of them. And I realized that there was kind of an aviation theme to a lot of our hobbies. And as kids in Midwest City, we did a lot of model airplane stuff, and then that led us to this idea of building uh, a one-person helicopter, which actually we worked off a specific plan from Popular Science magazine. We would raid the Boy Scout hut on weekends late at night and go over and jump in, sit in the stack and read all these magazines. And one of them was Popular Science. And we saw the plans for this helicopter. And we thought, well, we could do that. And Mark's dad worked at Tinkerfield. So he was in aircraft maintenance. They had a supply of old propellers from World War II planes. And he said he could get us one. And we thought, well, we're home free on that. Got a washing machine motor from a lady across the street. Put it together basically with tape and baling wire, and we thought we had it ready. Cranked it up, the propeller went around. We thought we're there, but we decided at the last minute. Well, the lady wanted her washing machine motor back too, so we had to give that back to her. But I mentioned in the book that years later, as a journalist, I was in the Checkpoint Charlie Museum in Berlin. I've done a lot of work over there, a lot of reporting in Germany, and I saw in that museum, which featured a number of escape mechanisms that people used, a one-person helicopter that looked a lot like the one that Mark and I were building back in the day. And I wondered, the guy actually made it over the wall in the thing, and I wonder if we would have been able to get that thing back down, if we'd tried. But neither of us was real big on being the test pilot.
Right, drawing straws for that. Perhaps it's best that plan did not work out. We've got one more segment left after this short break here. This is the KGOU Readers Club. I'm Logan Layden, managing editor. The book we're focused on is Tinkertown, a Wheatfield, an Airbase, and Us, the story of Midwest City and Tinker Air Force Base. I've got the author, Jim Willis, for one more segment where we're going to talk about falling in love. We're going to talk about ponies. We're going to talk about tragedy as well. It wasn't always sunshine and rainbows in Midwest City. Back in a moment on KGOU.
Yeah.
And we're back with the KGOU Readers Club, focusing on the book Tinkertown, Wheatfield, an Airbase, and Us. I'm KGOU managing editor Logan Layden. And I've got the author, Jim Willis, with me for one more segment here to talk about Midwest City, the history of it, the history of the Airbase, Tinker, and of course, himself. When it comes to Midwest City, we did a program a few months ago. Our listeners are familiar with it, How Curious, hosted by our own Rachel Hopkin, that focused on Midwest City and ponies. I'll let you tell us, what did ponies have to do with Midwest City and its development in its early years?
There's one right there.
I see, yes.
It had a lot to do with Midwest City, the Shetland pony did, and that's why it's on the cover of my book. Bill Atkinson, the founder, loved ponies, loved horses, loved ponies. He had a couple prize-winning Shetlands himself. he built his home on a big acreage out. It's still there actually, on the north side of what was then the north side of Midwest City, and a big barn out there with his house. And he decided that Midwest City was growing pretty fast. It grew in phases. It went from the original mile to a development called Country Estates just to the north of it, with a little bit more expensive homes. But there wasn't really an upscale subdivision, so he decided that the town needed one, because there were a lot of executives and a lot of officers coming into town by this time in the 1950s. And so he develops an area just north of Country Estates, just north of Reno Street, and he calls Ridgecrest Estates. And so what he did was to start building bigger homes, more expensive homes in the 20,000 to 25, $26,000 range, which was a lot back then because most of the other homes were going between about $6,000 and $15,000. And so to kind of add an extra enticement, these homes were built on half-acre to acre lots out there. And he decided that he was going to both entertain his hobby as well as use ponies as a marketing tool. And so he goes and buys about 200, 250 of these Shetland ponies and brings them in. And puts out this campaign, starts advertising that for the first 100 buyers of homes in Ridgecrest, you're going to get a pony. You're going to get a Shetland pony. We'll even build you a shed out back for it. And I think it wound up being so popular that I know it wound up being so popular that he actually extended that offer past that first 100 buyers. So there were ponies all over the place out there, and he would allow people to come out on Sunday afternoons to his pony farm where he had an arena with ponies in it, and the kids could ride for free around the track. And while the kids were riding, he or one of his associates would talk to mom and dad about scheduling a visit to come and see an open house in Ridgecrest. And my family did that. And my sister and I were ecstatic about it. My older sister, CJ, who's 2 years older than me. So we went to the open house, and Mr. Atkinson did what he always did do. I've come to find out later. He would take mom into the kitchen, and he would show her all the latest appliances. And this thing called the Lazy Susan, which was a brand new deal at the time for cabinetry. And he would tell mom and dad, "Would you mind if I take your kids out back? Because I got something out there for them." So he would take us out back, and there would be the pony out there already saddled, ready to go. So we would ride it around the yard while mom and dad were touring the rest of the house. So his idea was get mom hooked, get the kids hooked, and dad wouldn't have a chance, and the house would be sold. And that plan worked time and time again. Unfortunately, it didn't work for my family. Dad was pretty stubborn about his money and being thrifty. So that was it. There was a big pony club there. The whole thing was featured in Life magazine as part of, there was an actual national pony craze during the 1950s in the US. And they still hold pony club reunions out there to this day for families that used to have ponies back in the day. So it's an amazing part of the story. The pony became an unofficial symbol, sometimes official symbol of Midwest City.
Who would have known?
Along,
Yeah,
yeah.
between you and our own Rachel Hopkin, would have had no idea. And we talked early in the episode about how your hometown shapes you,
Yeah.
and including falling in love for the first time. You talked about the importance of the movie theater there in Midwest City.
It was huge.
Tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about that, or else you may have not fallen in love for the first time.
It was, yeah, I know. Yeah, it was huge. It was the magnet for all the kids on weekends, that's for sure. 400 kids or more would be in there. Um, yeah, so I was 15 years old, and I had already made a lot of trips down to the SkyTrain. Uh, I was ready to fall in love, and for whatever reason, probably because I was 15, And so one day I go down and there's this movie showing called The Parent Trap. It's the original Parent Trap. And there's a starlet in there from England named Haley Mills. And it's not enough that they feature her once, but she's twins in the movie. So you get a double dose of this very cute 15-year-old. We were the same age. And and that was it. I was hooked, and I would spend a lot of allowance money going back and seeing that movie again and again, as long as it was there. Fast forward to about maybe 40 years later, and I was living out in Southern California and teaching out there at a university. Hadn't seen too many movie stars around, and I was disappointed in that. But one day I was over at a Chico store getting a present for my wife for her birthday in Manhattan Beach, California, right on the beach. And I turned around, and right behind me in line was Haley Mills. So I turned to her and I said, before the mental filters kicked in, I said, I fell in love with you when I was 15 years old. And she just sported the biggest smile and said, I'm so pleased. I was able to be there for you, or something like that. I didn't know what she was saying because I was so knocked out over actually getting to meet her. And so yeah, so that was a sky train for me.
Well, and appreciate your wife allowing you to relate that story to us. But that's fascinating. So yeah, you fall in love with this actress at this movie theater in this town that was just built whenever you were a little kid, and then 40 decades
Yeah,
later, run into her
yeah.
in Southern California. Very,
Sometimes I
very
wish Bill
interesting.
Atkinson were still alive so I could tell him what he did for
Yes, indeed.
me.
Well, I do. As we get toward the end here, like I mentioned, everything wasn't always great in Midwest City. You mentioned a little bit. I mean, there were terrible aircraft accidents that killed people both in the planes and also on the ground. And over the decades of its existence, we've seen tornadoes have a big influence on the town as well. You were here in night. Were you, if I remember right, you were here in 1999
I
when a
was.
big tornado came through town. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a friend up at the Oklahoman. I used to work at the Oklahoman as a reporter, and name is Ed Kelly. In fact,
Yeah,
he's the immediate past dean of the journalism school there at OU.
I'm aware of
And
him. Yes.
he used to tell me, he said, Jim, it's really good to see you, but could you not come back so much? Because there were two occasions that I did where I brought, well, I didn't bring it, but tragedy came along with me. The first was in 95. I was back home licking my wounds from a personal tragedy and recentering myself. And I'd only been there for a couple of weeks when the Oklahoma City bombing occurred. And so I swung back into action as a reporter. I went to work for the Edmond Sun, Evening Sun, that I used to edit before I went to the Oklahoma and covered the aftermath of that for a couple of months. Life-changing experience for all of us. And then in '99, I was asked to come back to be inducted into the Wall of Fame at the high school. And that happened to me May 3rd, 1999. And that was the night that the F-5 Twister came through. And so they had to adjourn the dinner before the ceremony began, the award ceremony. And we wound up in the basement locker room of the field house there at the high school and waiting it out, watching on a monitor, television monitor, as this twister was coming right at us. And it kept on coming. And it got to the corner of Air Depot and 29th Street, which is about a block and a half from where we were. And it took a turn north and missed us by about a block and a half, wiped out a lot of the west side of Midwest City there. So, yeah, it wasn't all fun and games,
Now,
but it's,
and you nowadays, Midwest City boasts a large percentage of minorities in the
yeah,
community. This was not the case when you were
no,
growing up.
no, there's a chapter in the book called A Monochrome Town Finds Diversity. And, and it's true. It was a different town at the time. Uh, Except we always had a good representation of indigenous Americans, Native Americans, And there was absolutely no difficulty at all that I could see in terms of the blending of that. We're used to Native Americans in Oklahoma. It's part of our proud heritage, so we didn't have a problem. But we did not have any African American families. And I graduated from Midwest City High School in '64, and there were no blacks at all in the school. And I don't recall encountering many at all. But that changed. It started changing about that time, about the mid 1960s, and fortunately, the city, began becoming more diverse. I think because of the Air Force families that were coming in were more diverse, and today it's a normal blend of of the ethnicities and races in Midwest City. So that's a good aspect of the city, and but it's a different place from where I grew up.
Well, and it continues to evolve. Got to think it's one of the younger proper cities in Oklahoma, given that it started in the 1940s there. Well, do you get back much still? Don't
I
bring
do.
me.
My
Yeah.
sister CJ lives out in Newalla, just east there of Midwest City. And I've developed renewed a lot of friendships and developed a lot of friendships from those days. Some people I hadn't seen since I graduated, and that was one of the upsides of Facebook for me and for them. We came back together, and then we a lot of us, reestablished friendships back at our 50th reunion, and been in touch ever since. So it's fun to come back and see people that I didn't know so well at the time,
Well,
but now I do.
I learned a great deal from this book about Midwest City and its history. So I appreciate you doing it and for
Sure.
spending some time with us today.
Yeah.
Uh, have a good rest of your day, and
Thank
let me
you.
know next time you're in town.
Okay, Logan.
Love to
Thank
meet
you
up.
very much.
Appreciate your
Okay.
time. That
Okay.
is Jim Willis. He is the author of Tinkertown, Wheatfield, and Airbase, and Us. It's all about the history of Midwest City, of Tinker Air Force Base, and of him personally, Dr. Willis. And thank him once again for being with us on the KGOU Readers Club. Once again, I'm managing editor Logan Layden. That'll do it for this episode, but tune in a few weeks from now for our next edition. Once again, the book was Tinkertown,